Welcome to the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast, where we have fun with practical application and we get mental with the science of behavior. Put them both together and you get results, solutions for your behavior problems, and the tools you need to achieve your training goals. I'm your host, Barbara Heidenreich. Let's talk training. Who wants to be an animal trainer? Well, you do. Of course you do, because it's the coolest job on the planet. You're going to really love this episode because I interview Gary Wilson from the Exotic Animal Training and Management Program at Moorpark College. And he's going to share with you a great program that helps people become animal trainers. Before we get into the interview, I want to remind you to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Your fabulous reviews help other people find the podcast. And after the interview with Gary, you're going to want to stick around because I'm going to answer another one of your questions. It's a follow-up to our recall training question, so stick around for that. Let's get into the interview with Gary. Hey, welcome everybody. It's Barbara Heidenreich, and I have a special guest here with me today. It's Gary Wilson, and Gary is a senior professor at the Exotic Animal Training and Management Program at Moorpark College in Moorpark, California. Welcome, Gary.
Thanks, Barbara. It's great to be here.
Yay, I am so excited to have you as a guest because there are so many people out there who are getting their start in the world of animal training, or they're hoping to get started in the world of animal training, and you are the perfect guest to take us on this journey.
Yeah, we've been doing that for a lot of students over our long history at Moorpark College.
Great. So first of all, I think we need to know a little bit about you. Would you be so kind as to tell us how you got into the animal training industry?
Yeah, I was interested in marine biology originally, and I grew up in Ventura County where Moorpark College is located, and I was fortunate enough to get to take a marine biology class by a man named Bill Brisby that was offered at Moorpark College, and I was a high school senior at the time. A few of us got to take this course at night at Moorpark College, and Brisby this is in 1972, Briz, as he was called, was working at that time on starting the Exotic Animal Training Management Program at Moorpark College. But he was an innovative professor at that time. There was a lot of innovation going on in the community colleges. And so he was offering this marine biology class, and that's what I took. And from that, I was inspired. I really wanted to train marine mammals, dolphins and killer whales. After I graduated from high school, I went off to UC San Diego and was going to study. I actually got some bad advice from my marine biology teacher in high school. Said, "Don't go into marine biology; you can't make any money at it." And so I was going to study physical oceanography, and I did okay at school, but I could have done better because I was spending more time at SeaWorld and the San Diego Zoo than I probably should have been. So, but I got to do some cool stuff there. I talked to the director of the Scripps Aquarium to loaning me a little moray eel that I kept in my dorm room. And I watched them do some research with a little sea lion that they had there. And of course, like I said, I was spending a lot of time. I got an annual pass to SeaWorld and was spending a lot of time there. I decided to drop out of UC San Diego and go back to Moorpark College and pursue the Exotic Animal Training Management Program that had started up just the year before. And so I got in 1975 and learned training of all kinds of different animals. We had a little sea lion at the time. I got a little experience with that. And then Brisby, he had contacts at the U.S. Navy at the marine mammal program there. And so he learned that there was an opening there. And so upon graduation, I interviewed down in San Diego. It was kind of strange in that it was a top secret program and had to have the interview outside. The program director said, we got to do it outside. There's secret stuff on my desk that you can't see. All they could tell me was that it's open ocean training of dolphins. You need to be able to scuba dive, and it's in Hawaii. And that's all we can tell you, basically. And so kind of a leap of faith, I was offered the job, and I moved to Hawaii and started this job. And it's now been declassified, but it was training dolphins to locate mines on the bottom of the ocean. So mine hunting. It was amazing. So I got to work for 2 years with a dolphin and take it all the way. It was a complex training problem in that it took, our training plan was 18 months long, and then another 6 months of training military personnel, usually SEAL team or UDT divers, to actually work the dolphins when they deploy. I got to take a dolphin all the way from, he wasn't totally naive. He had been trained on other projects before, so he had to learn this whole mine hunting thing. And in fact, he was, while I was working with him, we would motor through this area on the way back from between our practice range and back to our floating pins. And he kept telling me that there was a mine there and there wasn't supposed to be. And I'd send him with a marker and he'd go down and I'd have a diver go look. It wasn't very deep, only about 15 feet deep. And a snorkeler would go in and look, and he said, no, there's nothing there. Well, after about third or fourth time of the dolphin doing this, I had one of the divers go down and start digging around and actually found a mine that we had lost, an inert mine. It wasn't a danger to anybody, but it was buried in the sand. And this is how we learned that the dolphins could not only, they're using their sonar, their echolocation to do this, and then we learned that they could do it through the sand even and find these buried targets. And so that's now part of their normal training. And so I did that for 2 years. In the process, I got married and decided I wanted to go back to school and finish my degree. And the plan was, so I could go back to the Navy. And I was a contractor. I wasn't actually employed by the Navy, but I was employed by a company called SECO back then. And it's now Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC, has the contract. So I asked to transfer back to California and worked in San Diego for 6 months with a beluga, which was pretty fun, doing a research project with this beluga where we're doing range detection. In other words, we're figuring out what their capabilities were with echolocation, where he had to find a 3-inch stainless steel ball in the water. It got to where, I had trouble seeing if it was above the water, if it was so far away. And he was a really interesting animal to work with, a lot of personality. So anyway, I did that for 6 months while I was waiting to start school at UC Santa Barbara. And there I finished my bachelor's degree in biology because I had learned from experience that my marine biology teacher in high school was wrong, and that you should, college is hard. You should study the thing that you're interested in in order to stay motivated. So I got hooked on the idea of research while I was there, and I got into a master's program there studying behavior of white-crowned sparrows. Pretty different from dolphins. But while in 1981, Bill Brisby kept in contact with Briz at the program at Moorpark, and he offered a part-time teaching job, offered me the opportunity to teach part-time there at Moorpark. And I started doing that while I was going to school at UCSB and working on my master's degree. And then I finished that in 1985, the same year that Brisby retired. And I was lucky enough to be hired as his replacement. And so I took over as the director of the EATM program in 1985. Did that until about 2000, during when the college reorganized things. We moved from, we had this facility that I had helped build as a student called the Exotic Animal Compound. It was next to the football stadium, this big field. And we got the opportunity to build a new facility, which became America's Teaching Zoo that we have on campus. It's a 5-acre zoo. It allowed us to upgrade the enclosures that the animals had, as well as open it to the public and give the experience to the students of working with the public coming into the zoo. And so I helped design that facility, and we moved in 1990. Like I said, 1990, we moved into America's Teaching Zoo, and then continuing to build that facility out. And then in 2000, the college reorganized things, because I was running both the zoo and the EATM program, and that was really too much to do. So they hired a Michaelin Hines is her name, who is our zoo operations supervisor. So she runs the teaching zoo. And then myself and Brenda Woodhouse, another full-time professor at Moorpark College, she and I are co-department chairs for the EATM program.
Wow. Yeah, that is an amazing journey. Boy, and it's interesting because there's a number of things I could really relate to there because I actually kind of spent quite a bit of time in California. I moved there when I was 14 and I went to Berkeley, UC Berkeley for I guess like a year and a half. And I left school too. There's something here that's not clicking for me.
Yeah.
And I went down to Santa Barbara, but I just hung out. And I didn't do anything. I lived in an apartment with a friend of mine from high school. And then I went back to school at UC Davis. And that same experience that you're talking about, where like if you're not doing classes that meet your passion, you just don't excel. And
Right.
I excelled in those classes that were all about animals, like ornithology and mammalogy and herpetology. But I didn't excel in the classes that didn't really interest me because everybody's on the veterinarian path there. And I also did a lot of work study classes. And I also did, I worked on a project that was song sparrow dialect in the Peter Marler's lab. I don't know if you knew him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very
Do you
cool.
know who that is?
No, I certainly have read a lot of his stuff.
Yeah. I would play recordings of song sparrow dialects to different nestlings, and we would see which dialect they would pick up. So that was my job.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at status signaling in the white-crowned sparrows.
Wow.
They breed up in the Yukon, and then they come down to Santa Barbara for the winter, and they don't know each other, and they forage in these little flocks, and so they have these black and white crown stripes that indicate their position in the dominance hierarchy. So I was taking immature females, which are at the bottom of the hierarchy, and they have brown and gray crown stripes, and I'd bring them into an aviary, like 10 at a time, and let them figure out a dominance hierarchy amongst the birds there. And then half of them I would paint to look like adult males, and with black and white stripes, and they would go right to the top of the hierarchy. I would joke, people would ask me what I did, and I told them I was a wildlife artist. I painted birds.
I love it. Yeah. And it's funny, right out of UC Davis, I started a job at what was then called Marine World Africa USA.
Yeah.
And that's where I learned about training. It's now a Six Flags for people that are wondering where that place is. And that's where I learned about animal training. It's also where I first met people that came out of EATM program from Moorpark. And I really found my passion about animal training at Marine World Africa USA. And had I known about the exotic animal training program at Moorpark, I probably would have gone there, but it was sort of like I was already into my journey, and it was like, do I go back for more school, or do I not? Do I continue here? What do I do? But that's where I first met students that had come out of the facility where you now teach.
Yeah. Well, we have a connection in that. So Brisby got the idea for the program because as he was also a consultant to the Navy at Point Mugu. And Point Mugu was where the Navy started their marine mammal program. The Navy first got interested in dolphins to figure out if they could learn how dolphins swim as fast as they do, and if we could incorporate some of those things into submarines and torpedoes and stuff like that. And they recognized, after they did this research on the dolphin, they recognized that, hey, we could teach these animals to perform a task for us. And they started that at Point Mugu, which is here in Ventura County. Brisby was a consultant to the Navy, to Point Mugu. Point Mugu has a large lagoon, Mugu Lagoon, one of the last natural lagoons on the West Coast. And there's a husband and wife team, the McGinnitys, who had studied animal life there and cataloged it and had all this huge collection of these preserved specimens of animals from the lagoon. And Brisby was hired to take that over when the McGinnitys retired. And so he was doing stuff for the Navy. Of course, has the responsibility of any of the land that they have. They have the responsibility of caring for the animals and plants on that land. One of the things that Point Mugu uses, they develop missiles and things at Point Mugu, and they have an island, part of the Channel Islands, San Nicolas Island, that they use for practicing things. Well, there's elephant seals come there to breed. So Brisby would be out on his belly crawling amongst these elephant seals, taking rectal temperatures to monitor the health of these elephant seals. And so in his visits to to Point Mugu, he got to meet some of the animal trainers that the Navy had brought in to train the dolphins and the sea lions that they started working with. And because the Navy itself didn't have any expertise, so they brought people from animal trainers from other areas, including studio animal training, which really grew up here in Southern California, not too far from Moorpark College, because of our proximity to the film industry. And so Brisby got to know these animal trainers and learned of this stuff that they were doing in training animals for movies and TV. And then so he thought, hey, we could do a class in wild animal behavior and have these guys bring animals to the college. And so he started offering this class. Like I said, it was a time of innovation at the colleges, and they let him do this class, and he had lion cubs and chimpanzees and all kinds of stuff, in the classroom. So he had students start taking these classes, and he started adding more and more classes like animal training and so forth. And we didn't have a facility at Moorpark at the time. So he took them to a place in Fillmore, just over the hill from Moorpark, little town of Fillmore, where there was a facility called Africa USA. That was a compound to train animals for movie and TV work. Over the years, Africa USA relocated a couple times up the California coast and eventually merged with Marine World, and it became Marine World Africa USA. And we're connected.
Wow, I didn't even know that story. That is so cool. Yeah, and as you probably know, so many of the people that worked at Marine World Africa USA, there's still a very tight community there, and there's a little Facebook group for those of us that were there back then, because it was a very unique place. They did a very kind of close contact with animals type of experience, and I'm grateful for my experience there, because I really feel like it was a kind of once in a lifetime opportunity and probably never to be again type of experience. So great stories from those days. Yeah, it was a really unique experience. And, it definitely, I learned a lot about animal training there, and it hooked me for life. Here I am to this day, still in the world of animal training and loving it. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like,
sure.
I know a little secret now that not too many people know about. Hey guys, we're going to take a little break from this fabulous interview with Gary Wilson to give listeners the first secret word. And the first word is beluga, Beluga. Secret words are for members who are working towards badges and want to get credit for having listened to the podcast. Okay, back to the podcast. Let's see. So the teaching zoo is different than the classroom. So what kind of animals are now there at the teaching zoo that the students actually have an opportunity to work with?
Well, from the beginning, Brisby recognized the value of his hands-on experience, because those students that he took, he had students in class, but the students he took over to Africa USA and got to spend time with the animals, a lot of them at the end of the semester got offered jobs. And so he said, hey, we could make a vocational program out of this, and there's a market. And so from the beginning, he envisioned that we would have animals on campus. It was a hard sell for the college trustees, but Brisby was able to convince them, and he started with a wolf, a hand-raised wolf named Kiska. It was the first animal that the program had, and we built this compound, like I said, the exotic animal compound. Brisby, because he had connections all over, he had this connection with Atlantic Richfield, the oil company. In fact, when I was in his marine biology class, we did our labs on Saturdays at Rincon Island, which is a man-made island for pumping oil, half-mile off the coast that we could drive out to over this causeway. And so we built these corrals out of old oil drilling pipe that the Atlantic Richfield gave to Brisby, and we built these big corrals and all kinds of enclosures. Like I said, he always recognized the value of the hands-on experience. To this day, we still value that. I like to think I'm an okay instructor, but I know that my students really learn when I've told them, I've talked about stuff in class, and then they go out on the zoo and they have a live animal in front of them and they try to implement what they've learned, and the animal throws them a curve or does something different. And that's when real learning takes place. So we felt constrained by the size of the exotic animal compound. It was only like 1.5 acres in size, and we wanted to do more. We wanted to give the animals more, bigger enclosures. Like I said, we wanted to have the ability to bring the public into the facility and do presentations there, as well as see the animals on exhibit. And so it took us a couple of years planning this facility. We worked with Ted McAlridge from Santa Barbara Zoo, who built Santa Barbara Zoo. He consulted with us and helped us design this facility. Susan Angford, who was his assistant director, went on to become director of Cheyenne Mountain Zoo. She helped us out as well. It took us a couple of years, and we built this facility, which is on campus. It was an area that had been occupied by our agriculture program, and we had a program that started up about the same time the EATM program, the equine management program started there, working with horses, and they moved out to Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, National Park Service land. They occupied a ranch that the Park Service wanted them to maintain as a historic site. And so this area became available, like I said, about 5 acres. So we turned it into a zoo. And that's what America's Teaching Zoo is. It's my idea to name it America's Teaching Zoo. I wanted to get across that it is a teaching facility, but it's also the premier place. If you want to learn about animal training, this is the place to come to. So we're open on the weekends, not at the moment because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but normally we're open on the weekends, as well as we have school groups in during the week that we can do educational presentations with. And so the students get that experience of caring for the animals in a zoo and working with the zoo guests as well.
And I remember seeing a video that went pretty viral not too long ago where I think, right, where the students had trained one of the animals for a jugular blood draw. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So it's a student named Liz Evans, and she went on after graduating. She now is a trainer and educator at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. But while she was with us, so the students, we have about 120 different animals at America's Teaching Zoo. And the students are assigned different animals to work with. With my animal training lab, they take 3 semesters of my animal training lab, and in that course, they have to train 2 animals each semester. And over the year, they have to train a bird, an herbivore, a carnivore, and a primate. They have to get that range. We focus on different things in different semesters. We just started our summer semester. As we go year round, the animals don't take any time off, so the students don't get to either. That's been an important aspect, I might say, regarding the program, that we're not only, the program is very academic, and we teach all the academic aspects of caring for animals, and I teach animal diversity and animal behavior, but students actually work on the zoo and care for the animals and train the animals. And one of the things that they learn is that working with animals is not only a profession, but it's a lifestyle. The animals sometimes need care in the middle of the night, and you have to be there for that. And they don't realize yesterday was Memorial Day or anything like that. So the summer semester, we focus in my animal training lab, we focus on just sort of building relationships and basic training concepts. And then in the fall semester, we focus especially on husbandry training. And in the spring, we usually we have our big open house called the Spring Spectacular, where we do a big show. And so we work on kind of show behavior, presentation kind of behaviors. So Liz, during her fall semester, working with the spotted hyena, incredibly intelligent animal. They're primate smart. This animal had actually been trained for a blood draw before, but the behavior had been lost and hadn't been maintained. And so I gave her the assignment to bring that behavior back, and then to improve the behavior, in the sense of teaching the animal to allow someone else other than the trainer to actually draw the blood. Because oftentimes trainers don't have that expertise in terms of the medical expertise of drawing blood or giving injections and so forth. So oftentimes you have to train the animal to not only accept the procedure, but then accept somebody they don't know, the vet tech or the veterinarian, to do the procedure. So this animal, Savuti was his name, he was with us for many years. He lived to be 20-something, and he passed away a few years ago. And he would present his neck to be scratched. He would press his neck up against the mesh of the enclosure as a greeting. He seemed to enjoy having his neck scratched there, and he would let me do it. He would let just about anybody do it. We took that behavior and we saw we could get access to his jugular vein there. And so Liz taught him to hold the behavior for an extended period of time. I think the longest she ever did it was like 5 minutes. Ken Ramirez uses the video in some of his instruction to talk about sort of look at the question of, do you need a keep going signal or not? Because Liz tended to do that. I personally don't think you usually need a keep going signal, and but it kind of becomes a crutch. It's kind of a thing. It's a human nature kind of thing to do. But anyway, Liz got the behavior back, and in fact, if you watch the video, Savuti presses his neck up against the mesh, and Liz has a little bit of trouble getting at the jugular. She's trying to move him a little bit so that she can get access to his jugular vein, and he's pressing it right against one of the bars of the mesh, and he doesn't want to move. He's pressing so hard there. She brought the behavior back, improved it, and then for her test, Savuti had to let me draw blood from him. So I stuck him and pulled the blood, and he did great. I needed a little work on my technique. I was surprised at how close to the surface the jugular vein is on a hyena. I was able to pull blood, and so Liz got 100% on that final exam.
I love that video too. That's so excellent.
When you look at that video, there's after she takes the needle out, there's one of the things that we teach, I'm sure you do too, is that you want the animal to continue to hold the behavior even after you pull the needle out. There's a tendency for us to bridge right when we, pull the needle out, and that teaches the animal to anticipate that sensation of the needle coming out and think that's the end of the behavior, when they need to focus on just their behavior is just holding the position and ignoring all the the needle stick and all that stuff. But so she pulls the needle out and she's holding a finger there to hold it off, and she hands off the syringe to her assistant to collect the blood, put the blood in the vials, and the assistant, another student, she hit something and it made this metallic sound. It sounded kind of like a clicker, which was the bridge that we used with Savuti, and he pulls his head down and looks for the food, and Liz has to ask him to hold it, go back to the position, and he does. He mistook that sound for a clicker.
Now I'll have to go back and watch that again. And I agree with you on the keep going signals. I always tell people when they ask that question, I said, if you just train good duration, you don't need a keep going signal.
Yeah, it wasn't a project I was involved in, but the belugas at the Navy, they did a hearing study where they needed the belugas to dive down to a bite plate, and they would hold on to this bite plate. They'd find it, there was a tone coming out, and so they could find it. They could probably find it anyway, but anyway, they dive down and they grab this bite plate, and then they would listen to tones, just like a person doing a hearing test. And then when they hear the tone, they would vocalize into a hydrophone. And well, the final test really was, they had them down at 900 meters, or 900, what was it? It was almost 1,000 feet deep. And so it's pitch black down there. And in order to validate the study, they had to do some test runs where they would go down, grab the bite plate, and sit there for 10 minutes without hearing any tones. And because they want to make sure the animal's not guessing that he's heard a tone. And then after 10 minutes, then they get a release tone that tells them, okay, you're done. That's the bridge, essentially, come up. So yeah, they sit there for 10 minutes. They don't hear a keep going signal. They don't hear anything. And down there in the pitch black.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, and I think we underestimate what they're capable of, and like you said, it becomes a bit of a crutch to think that you have to keep saying, do it, keep going,
Yeah,
keep going. Yeah, so it's just
right.
about training that good duration from the get go. Ooh,
Yeah.
fascinating stuff. We could talk about all these other things for a long time, I think, Gary.
Yeah, that's
Back
true.
when conferences can happen again, we might have to continue these conversations in the bar or
That's right.
something.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Absolutely. Okay, so we'll go back to maybe helping people figure out how they can have a career in animal training.
All right. Put me back on thing. My
Yeah.
students have, I think, a competition sometimes to see what kind of tangents they can get me on going off on.
That's the interesting stuff. So we know there have been wolves at the teaching zoo. You have had hyenas. You say that they have to train an herbivore and a primate and a carnivore. So what are some of those species that you have in those categories?
Yeah, so we have lions and tigers. We have probably the largest animal. Well, we had over the course of the history of the program, we've had a couple of elephants. That was before we were on the teaching zoo. That was down in the animal compound. And but now and then we've had water buffalo, but we also have donkeys. Right now we have two big donkeys, llamas, sheep, goats, as well as the exotic stuff. So in our carnivore area, like I said, the lions, we have two lions, two tigers. We have an ocelot, a couple New Guinea singing dogs, a couple coyotes, and we have a new hyena, a little female hyena now. And another connection, she came just like Savuti, they both came from UC Berkeley. And then we have lots of citizens, parrots and macaws. We have mainly former pets that have donated to us. So we have Amazon parrots, we have a couple of blue and yellow macaws. We get animals on loan to us. The blue and yellows came to us from San Diego Zoo. We have other birds. We have turacos. We have blue crane. We have a number of raptors, turkey vultures, Harris hawk, bald eagle. The bald eagle is a real challenge to train, I can tell you. And I bet you know that. Great horned owls, barn owls. We have reptiles. We have a alligator named Happy, who's about 6 feet long. And we have big snakes and little snakes, and we have lizards, bullfrogs, and we have one old Galapagos tortoise. He's almost 100 years old, named Clarence. So he was collected in the Galapagos Islands, Townsend expedition in 1927, I think it was. So he's with us. He's great. We've trained him. He's target trained, so he follows a target. We took him to the Tonight Show with Jay Leno one time. So Julie Scardina, who was the animal ambassador for SeaWorld and Busch Gardens for many years, is one of our graduates. Julie and I, in fact, were classmates at Moorpark College. So we would help her out with appearances. So we took the Galapagos to the Tonight Show, and it was funny because the director decided not to use him because she was afraid he was going to come on too fast. TV, it's strange business. Primates, we have a gibbon who was a hand-raised animal, came from San Francisco. And we have a number of monkeys. We have a couple different baboons, olive baboons, a hamadryas baboon. We have a vervet monkey and a green monkey, and we're working on introducing the two of them together. North American porcupine. We have, all kinds of stuff.
It's a huge variety there. So students really do get quite a broad range of experiences for sure. You mentioned Julie Scardina. Are there some other graduates that people may be familiar with that have come out of Moorpark?
Zookeeper Rick Schwartz, who's the animal ambassador for San Diego Zoo, is one of our graduates. We have graduates all over the place. Anna Blosser Mercer, she's in Austria, and she came to California for the program, and then went back there, and she runs an animal training center there. She wrote a book. We were hoping to be able to use it, get it translated into English, but it hasn't happened yet. But she wrote a book on basically medical training for your pet. Right. So we do so much of that with our zoo animals, training them to accept medical procedures without stress. And so she wrote a book on how to train your dog and cat how to go to the vet and accept those kind of things and make it a lot less stressful on them. Yeah, we have graduates all over the place.
And what kind of jobs do graduates usually go on to? Well, I guess there could be lots of different things.
We say that we train people to be zookeepers, animal trainers, and wildlife educators. We've always had, probably because of our connection, our close proximity to the studio animal training world, we've always had a strong emphasis on animal training. And of course, I have brought that emphasis. That's my passion, is animal training, animal behavior. And so, but those are the areas you have to know how to care for these animals. So the zookeeping component is easy in a sense that everybody needs to know that, regardless of what you're going to do with these animals. And then we have the students do presentations, and we teach them how to interpret the animals. That's sometimes for some people the most scary part, right? They'd rather go work with the grumbly lion than get up in front of a bunch of people. So, but we make them do that and teach them how to be effective in helping people understand these animals and appreciate these animals. That's our job for all of us, right? We need to spread the passion and help people appreciate these animals. And then the animal training overlies everything, because we use the animal training in zookeeping, and just like I said, the medical training or husbandry training, making lives of the animals and the keepers easier by getting the animals to participate in the work. And then with the animal training, we can also augment or facilitate the wildlife education, in that we can demonstrate natural behavior. We can get the animals just comfortable in front of a bunch of people and showing off the amazing things that they do.
Yeah, and you make a good point that being able to present while an animal's doing behavior and paying attention to animal behavior and engaging with the audience is a skill you have to practice, just like practicing animal training. So that's pretty cool that you guys include that in the curriculum.
We have people face their fears. If they're afraid of snakes, we teach them how to work with snakes. If they're afraid of spiders, sometimes we have tarantulas and things like that. But like I said, probably the most common fear is just getting up in front of other people. And we found that not only giving them a purpose of wanting, the motivation to improve the lives of animals and promote conservation by spreading the word and educating people, that gives them the motivation. But then giving them practice, getting up there and having the experience of talking in front of a bunch of people and not dying is probably, beneficial for them developing their confidence. We're strong believers in not only, even if you don't want to go on to be a wildlife educator, you need to be able to speak for your animal. If you're the zookeeper on a string, you are the voice for those animals. So you need to be able to advocate effectively for their needs, and with your curator, with your zoo management, and so forth. Over all this stuff, also, of course, is teamwork. We have people come to us with the sort of fantasy that they're going to have their own compound and work by themselves with their animals, but nobody really does that. Everybody works with other people, and so you have to learn the effective techniques of teamwork as well.
What would you say is a typical day for a student there at the school?
We start early. Sometimes that's a hard thing for these young people to get in the habit of, but they have to be at the zoo at 6:30 in the morning because we need to get the cleaning and feeding done early in the morning before classes start. That was something that started, back in Brisby's time, and we've continued that. So they'll come in. They either work on the zoo for the morning cleaning. They either work Sunday through Wednesday or Wednesday through Saturday. And then that's 6:30 to 8:30, and then they have classes. We have a beautiful set of classrooms. We have a 150-seat auditorium that I get to teach in most afternoons, and then we have some general purpose classrooms as well. They walk out of the zoo and into the classroom and get instruction on nutrition and anatomy and physiology and health and safety and animal behavior, animal diversity, wildlife education, some of the concepts. And then they they come back in the zoo for their labs. So for my animal training lab, they are coming back in, and 2 or 3 times a day, they're doing training sessions with their animals. They also are doing day watch rounds. So they have a 2 or 3 hour slot during the week that they're doing rounds and checking on the animals and doing projects on the zoo that, just somebody's got to do this stuff. And there's, constant upkeep that we have to implement. Then in the evening, about 4 o'clock, everybody comes back in to close up the zoo, to do a final tally on that, check on the animals, to secure the facility, to do some projects, prepare some diets for the next day. And then we close up the zoo about 5 o'clock. Then they go home and they study. They, first year students are flipping through flashcards, trying to learn all the animals that I've required them to learn, all the scientific names that they stress over. So they study at night, and then hopefully, get to sleep at a reasonable time so they can get up the next morning and do it all over again.
So it's a very full day. And as I always recall, even way back when I was first starting out, that the biggest challenge is not so much financial in terms of like paying for school, but you are so busy, taking care of animals and studying and going to school that you really don't have time for a job. So the biggest challenge is really just, having the finances to support yourself and go to school. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it is a challenge. And a number of students do, they get financial aid. Some do have some part-time jobs. We do have few employers in our community who are understanding and understand that the students need some flexibility in their schedule, because things come up. Like I said, animal gets sick and we need to be there through the night with the animal. We live in Southern California. We've had to evacuate the zoo about 3 or 4 times because of wildfires. So, these things can happen. The students learn that it is a commitment. It's, like I said, it's a lifestyle. They're all passionate about these animals. We help them channel that passion into productive output in terms of how they care for these animals, advocate for them.
Okay, and here's the question that probably most people want to know. How hard is it to get into the school?
Over the years, our selection process has changed. It used to be that we did an interview. We've always had more applicants for the program than we could take. We admit about 52 students each fall for the 2-year program, 22-month program. Several years ago, 20 years ago now, the college changed that. They had us change to a lottery. And so people apply. We take applications in January, basically the month of January. And then we do a lottery process. We pull names out of a hat and we ask the students to come to applicant information meeting. We want people to come to the college and see what they're getting into and see the facility, make sure that, it's not San Diego Zoo. It's much more modest, but to learn about the requirements, the hardships, the challenges of going through the program, and so that they can make an informed decision if we do pick their name out of a hat. Yeah, we've had students apply several years in a row and not get picked before they finally get in. But we used to have people, even when we did the interview process, we'd have people apply year after year. I like the interview process because we could at least tell people, here's something you could do to make your application stronger next time. And you usually go out and get more experience. Or in some cases, our program is academically rigorous. And so in some cases, we needed people to go out and get more academic skills, improve their grades so they could get through the program.
Okay, I think I have one more question for you, Gary.
Okay.
What advice would you give to those hoping to have a career in animal training just getting started today?
So I'd advise people to look for opportunities to get experience and to learn all they can. You can do training with your dog. You can, your cat. Cat's a little more challenging sometimes. And lots of great resources. Your website, Barbara's Animal Training Fundamentals, is a great website to go to learn about fundamentals of animal training. and then learn all you can about the animals that you want to work with. As I told you, I wanted to work with marine mammals. I ended up working with camels and lions. I raised a tiger and a lion. I worked with all kinds of things. And in fact, when I was at Moorpark, the experience I had that was probably the most helpful in getting me the job working with dolphins was training of a North American river otter. And because it was protected contact training, it was an animal that I could not manipulate. We had the animal because he had opened a trainer's ankle at SeaWorld and opened his vein. And so this was an aggressive animal. And so I had to work him hands off. And so I had to shape entirely any behavior that I wanted. Couldn't manipulate him at all. And that's the same thing with dolphins. You can't push a dolphin around. You have to shape the behavior. So looking for opportunities to develop those skills. One of our goals at the community college, of course, is that we are producing lifelong learners. So not only are we teaching our students these skills that they need to be successful in this profession, but we're also teaching them how to learn. And so that, because no one knows it all. There's always opportunities. My own, philosophy of training continues to evolve. As I get to go to conferences and talk to people like you, Barbara, and get new ideas so that people are doing new stuff all the time. So you've got to be open to learning. You've got to be not only teaching yourself, but you have to recognize that other people are advancing the science and art of animal training, and you can learn from them. It's better to gain this knowledge through other people's mistakes, and so that you can progress faster than trying to learn it all from your own trial and error. All those things, looking for experience, just handling animals. Like I said, we know the value of this hands-on experience. Look to see if there's a local stable that you can work around horses, work around these big animals. You learn the body language of these animals and how to work safely around these big animals. And a local pet store with dogs and cats and rabbits and things like that too, just to get all the experience you can.
Totally agree.
All right.
Well, Gary, this was awesome. I learned so many new things myself from you.
That's great. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. Well, I don't want to keep you from your students because I know you have classes to teach today.
That's right. Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, Gary.
All right. Thank you, Barbara.
All
Take
right.
care.
You too. And it's time for secret word number 2. Secret word number 2 is sparrow. SPARROW. Secret word number 2 is sparrow. Secret words are for members who are working towards badges for their professional development. Okay, back to the podcast. Hey, let's get into that question. So you may recall in a previous episode, I answered some questions about training quick response to the cue. Amy asks, at the end of this interview, when answering the dog question, you mentioned it is better to not show the food to an animal that's already trained, I think, so that you know the response is to your cue rather than to the food. For an animal that is just learning a new cue, would you always show the food in the initial training? At what point do you hide it? Once you begin the new phase of hiding it, would you ever go back and let them see it occasionally? Lastly, after it has learned the cue, would you make the food sort of a random reinforcement, or would it be completely phased out over time? Hope the wording makes sense. Thank you. Okay, I think I understand what the questions are here. How do we phase out showing the food is really kind of that first question there. And so you're right, it is kind of a little dance, isn't it? We don't necessarily go from here's food to no food right away. You can do that in a bit of approximated manner so that the animal sees the food and then you're gradually starting to hide that food. I do that a lot, especially if I've trained an animal that the food is going to be hidden within my hand. And some of you probably have heard me talk about this before when we talk about the concept of object permanence, that an animal can learn basically because of the concept of object permanence that food is hidden within your hand, and then eventually it's going to be delivered from that hand. And eventually, if you wanted to, you could phase it out from being within your hand, but you're still going to deliver reinforcers, and then that closed fist can actually become just a target, and then food comes from someplace else. But there is a little delay when you do that. You do want to keep that in mind. So one of the things that can happen in those early stages when the animal's still learning the behavior is that sometimes you may need to flash the food as sort of a little bit of a reminder if the animal's not quite there yet. So it is true that you are having to make a little bit of a judgment call. Do I need to show the food or not? But again, if you're kind of getting in that place where you're showing the food a lot, it may be that you're asking for too much criteria. You may want to go back to that place where you shorten up the distance and you're looking for that animal that's really attentive so that it responds right away, so that you don't have to rely so much on showing the food. So you're really looking at a few factors to help you make that decision as to whether you want to go back to showing food or not. And again, it may also come into play whether the animal's really that interested in what you have to offer right then. So you're looking at so many factors to help you make that decision whether you need to show food or not. I recently just did a live stream where I was demonstrating how to train a pigeon to do a color discrimination. And one of the interesting things about that particular training session is that we were training in a park full of many other pigeons. There was also many opportunities for that bird to get food in many other places. So in the initial part of the training, I did have to show the food to the bird to get him to come over and participate in my training session. And there were times when I would have to flash the food to him in order for him to want to stay in my game, as opposed to go over to another location where people were just throwing food to pigeons and he could see the food over there. So there are these moments where you may think, oh, I might have to show food in order to get the animal to stay here and want to play my game, depending on the circumstances. So it's always a bit of a judgment call, if that makes sense, depending on the situation that you're dealing with. Eventually, I didn't have to show him the food once he realized it's a lot easier to get food playing her game than it is going over there and competing with all those pigeons over there to try and get a peck of food over there, even though I can see the food over there. So a lot of it has to do with reinforcement history, how easy it is to get food where you are, and looking at fading out food in your situation is something that you've done in small enough approximations. And so back to that question of once you've hidden it, would you ever go back to letting them see it occasionally? I might, but again, I also may lower my criteria to make it easier for the animal so that hopefully I don't have to go back to showing it. But again, depending on the circumstances, I might show it. So I know it's a really tough question to say you always do this or you always do that. It all depends on your setup. The second part of the question is really an interesting one. After the animal has learned the cue, do you use food to reinforce on an intermittent schedule, or do you just phase it out altogether? Now, for me, I don't phase reinforcement for the behavior out. It doesn't necessarily have to be food. It could be other types of reinforcers, but I definitely reinforce an animal for coming when called. And I'm one of those people that believes in reinforcing every single time the animal comes when called. Now, there might be some folks that would argue it should be on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. For me, I lean towards the camp of reinforcing every single time the animal is recalled. So that would be an interesting one to have someone on the other side of the table that would, want to argue with about intermittent schedules on that one. For me, I tend to be in the camp of let's reinforce every single time the animal comes on that one. So there you go. I hope that answers those questions. That brings you a little bit farther down the pathway there. And I'll share a link to the live stream so you can see the challenges we had trying to keep that pigeon's attention when there was so many other wonderful things and places to go to get food. And so those moments where I was kind of flashing him the food to say, hey, stick around with me and stay playing my game over here. Okay, if you have a question for me, just visit the episode webpage and you can submit your questions there. I hope you enjoyed our interview with Gary Wilson. I certainly did, and I look forward to seeing you here on another podcast. Have a great day. If you liked what you heard today, visit animaltrainingfundamentals.com for more quality content on animal training. You'll find courses, community, and extensive video examples from my consulting work around the world. We'd love to have you join our force-free family.